joke. So, yeah, Greg and Doug, and it looks like Beth also, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate this. Probably as we're dealing with a law that's treading in an area that I don't know a lot about. It'd be really useful to have on some of the fire safety concerns, your guys' input. I really do appreciate you taking the time to tune in. I am going to just run through quickly a couple things that I got out of the webinar. I don't know if anyone else has had a chance to look at it, but I'm going to share my screen. All right, so you should see, hopefully you guys now see a slide. It says context and safety considerations. Okay. So basically, there were two presenters, but the one presenter was someone who'd been worked as in fires in New York City for a long time, and then has wound up on a number of the committees sort of setting the policies for battery energy storage systems, because they were starting to be looked at in New York City a couple of years ago, and they realized they had to sort of understand what the risks were, what was going on. And so he, to me, seemed to have a great background in general and for this particular issue. So as it says there, basically most of the systems are lithium-ion battery systems, but as we'll see in a later slide, there are various battery technologies out there that may well get used. But the predominant one that's going to be used in the near future is lithium-ion. So the webinar really focused on that. And basically, things have to happen for something to go wrong. No surprise there. So, there are systems in place to charge these and discharge these, but if those go wrong and they're either, overcharged or discharged too quickly, or for some other reason they get too hot, things can go wrong. Obviously, something can crash into it, causing a problem, or indeed there could be some sort of component problem from the beginning. So those are some of the failure modes of the batteries. But in particular, what I draw attention to is the hazards. So of course there's fire, these could be on fire. Toxicity, there are gases released when the batteries fail. So some batteries, like lead acid batteries we're familiar with, they can release hydrogen gas while charging while in use. The lithium ion batteries, it's really in a failure mode that they're going to release some gases, and those gases are flammable, and I guess some of them are toxic. And so the updated codes deal with that to some extent. And they tend to be pretty hot fires. That's the high heat release. And the stranded energy part there is basically you have charged batteries. You have all this electronics that's connected to them to help them run. You have a fire, electronics get disconnected from the battery. So you have a charged battery there. They call that the stranded energy. And of course, the fire personnel have to know how to deal with that thing, because they're not just putting out a fire, but they're dealing with something that has energy packed into it. So that was one thing they pointed out. I thought to just click on this. Let's see. There we go. Okay, the other takeaway for me is that there has been a lot of work on codes recently. So starting in 2016, Underwriter Labs started destructively testing lithium-ion batteries so they would know what the failure modes were and what happened when they failed. And based on that, they started publishing guidance and standards that has then been picked up by various regulatory agencies such as the ICC, International Code Council, the National Fire Protection Association, and of course, New York State in our uniform code as well. And so what I was pleased to see is that there has been a lot of work, recent work, in the codes to deal with battery energy storage systems. It's not to say that it's perfect or foolproof, but it's not like, oh, we're dealing with 20-year-old codes that don't, again, they have adapted the codes to deal with the risks and hazards associated with the battery energy storage system. The most recent draft came out in 2021. And in the webinar, they stated that the 2020 New York State Uniform Code is consistent with that draft because essentially a lot of the same people were working on both. So New York had kind of a heads up on what was going to be in that 2021 draft. So anyway, that's just to emphasize that this is real recent stuff, but they've been trying to keep it up to date. The New York State Uniform Code applies both to residential systems and commercial systems. And I'm not going to go through a lot of the details on the residential systems, but it is something, for the fire chiefs in particular, that, there can be these systems in people's homes, or there could be some large facility located in town. Currently, there are no proposed facilities in town, but we're trying to, be aware for the future. But these sort of small 40 to 80 kilowatt hour systems are, definitely potentially some in town. I've got one of my houses probably close to 40 kilowatt. It's 20 to 40 kilowatt hours. I can't remember anymore. It's a lead acid battery system that we put in several years ago. But anyway, the code does deal with residential systems and tries to keep, has safety precautions of separation between things, access to them, all that kind of stuff. And then in terms of the larger commercial side, there's a lot of stuff in the code. And in particular, I want to draw attention to the hazard mitigation analysis. So if the system goes above 600 kilowatt hours, basically the developer is required to do a hazard mitigation analysis. And that has to prove that it, can conform to the state's uniform code and meet the UL conditions. They have to do testing on their actual design. So the laboratories has done the testing protocol in this 9540A, and you basically have to say that it can be contained, and so they're going to do. They have a hazard mitigation analysis. They have to do testing of their actual design. Some things also is that it's not just the fire departments, local fire departments that are going to be handling this. And this is, I think for our area, something I'm really wondering how this would actually work in practice. But the owner of the facility is supposed to have a fire remediation team that can help relieve the first responders, which, not necessarily our volunteer fire departments. It could be, whoever, but here maybe it would be, because I'm sure we have other first responders that wouldn't come out of either Slaterville or Brooktondale or Speedsville, and then notify the fire department. So these people are supposed to make the call as to, okay, there's a problem. Do we need to engage the fire departments? Their plan of how to handle things is supposed to, the town, the authority having jurisdiction, AHJ, which in this case the town and the code officer, can require a peer reviewer of these fire remediation plans, hazard mitigation plans. And of course, they have to have, as we have in our law, but they have to have a way of commissioning, saying the system is ready to go, performing up to snuff, and a decommissioning plan, which we will be looking at probably our next meeting, which is what happens either when it's destroyed or has a problem in a fire, or eventually the facility is at the end of its lifetime. So as I said, the fire code does treat various kinds of batteries: lead acid, nickel cadmium, nickel metal hydride, lithium ion. Flow batteries are, if they're not familiar with it, is basically a battery where the electrolytes sit in tanks and the fluids literally flow over the electrolytes, as opposed to being, as you normally think of a battery, as sort of a contained stuff in a can, basically of big tanks of chemicals and equipment in this case. And in particular, if you compare the lead acid and lithium ion cases, so the lead acid has to have exhaust ventilation all the time because of the possibility of off-gassing hydrogen gas. That's not required for lithium ion, but there is a requirement for ventilation of the space, because if there's a failure, gases are emitted. And one of the big concerns of the firefighters, the guys doing these codes, was because there was an incident in Arizona where basically they're trying to handle a fire. Eventually it became necessary to open the doors of the building. And when that happened, basically it blew up and the firefighters were thrown back yards, and one was injured. So at any rate, there has to be ventilation of the space, water, sprinkler systems, that kind of stuff. Spill control and neutralization, I noticed, was here for lead acid and not for lithium ion. And that's one thing I think I want to talk to you guys about, because it's a possibility in law. I expect that it's here because of the acid in the lead acid, which you wouldn't have that in lithium ion case, but I am concerned about toxics maybe getting out in the environment in the event of a failure, given the fire being fought and all the water thrown on it and everything else that's happening. So at any rate, that's most of the slides. I really zoomed through it because I know I got a late start here. I didn't want to keep our guests waiting, but I think I'm going to just look over my notes of things I thought. We talked about the toxic gases just before failing. I mentioned that, and the fact that when the system is burning, the control technology is gone, and so there may be stored energy still in the battery. And so there's a question of how firefighters should handle and dispose of those batteries. There was a description that in many ways a battery storage system fire is similar to a plastics fire in that it burns really hot. I guess hot, that means hotter than a typical residential building, I would assume. But also that there are toxic gases released and therefore ventilation requirements when fighting the fire and in the facility. I mentioned Underwriters Labs and their destructive testing, and the battery codes are relatively up to date. All right, looks like I got most of the key points I wanted to mention. And again, that was a real rapid fire thing. Sorry for spitting all that out at you so quickly. I do have one thing we'll follow up with later. They used a term I didn't understand in terms of firefighting. So again, that's what I got out of the webinar. I don't know, Jonathan or Will, if you guys watched it, if you had anything to add. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see each other better. All right.
So one thing I noticed is that there's fire remediation and fire mitigation, and I don't think the presenters were clear about the difference. But when you read the code, the way the code reads, fire remediation is addressed after a fire event. And the fire mitigation is like some measures that are ancillary to the remediation. So it implies that the remediation team does their tasks once there is a fire, but elsewhere in the code there are requirements for supervising stations, which are 24/7 monitoring, and that's different than the remediation team. If Greg or Doug are aware of a different way of interpreting that sort of language in the code, I'm all ears. I'm just reading what's in front of me.
All right. And I think Doug and Greg, I'm about ready to open it up to you to get your thoughts in general. You can address Will's question, and to remind you of some of the questions I had been thinking about as listening to the webinar is basically, they talk a lot about training. And I know, again, we're out in the boonies here, and it's a volunteer system, and I don't know if training has been provided to you guys. There is a sample law that NYSERDA has put out, and we've taken some of that language into our law that says basically, if a battery energy storage facility is built, that applicant, that company needs to provide training to the fire companies on how to combat a fire there. And I just wanted to know, again, for a lithium ion battery fire, not in an electric vehicle, have you guys come across information? Have there been trainings? Do you think it would be useful to have training if a facility is built? Also, there's all this talk about these great codes out there, but of course, it only works if the facilities are built really in compliance to them. And our code officer would have to be the person signing off on that. And, I don't know if you think there is enough expertise in the town based on your experience. I don't want you to, maybe it goes beyond what you guys know, to make sure our co-officer knows about these latest standards. And finally, I guess I asked you, we're talking about a battery energy storage system, but in general, issues tend to be more generic. So there could be any other number of facilities, again, a plastics manufacturing facility that could have some of the similar hazards. And do you know what a lithium battery fire is like, and what other kinds of things that might locate in our town that we would want at some point to think about including in some of the extra fire hazard mitigation stuff that's in this law? So those are a few of the questions I had thought of. And then there were some things in the law that we will talk about that we were thinking of including based on some conversations with Greg earlier. But I'd love to hear from both Doug and Greg now on any thoughts you have, if you had a chance to look at that, or on Will's question, my question, anything else that you have concerns about in terms of this law or battery energy storage system being located in Caroline.
All right. On the training part, I think the Office of Fire Prevention and Control will do some training. We haven't had much on anything like this. We've done some on the electric vehicles. With NYSEG, I know, and like some of the propane companies, they will come out and provide training to the department. So I would think that whoever was building the facility would provide training to all the departments. And I would think it probably should be a county-wide type of training. And then code officers, I imagine they're continuing training for code officers, and they have to, I don't know if they have to do training every so often or upgrades and stuff like that, but I would think that the code officer would need some quite training if he's going to be signing off on plans and stuff like that, that they're meet the requirements. On the team, like the pipeline that runs through, they hold yearly pipeline trainings, and they have they monitor everything. They have it staffed 24/7. So if they find leaks or problems, they know about it supposedly very quickly. And then they have people who are trained that would come out and work with what they call a unified command. It'd be an incident command, which would be the fire chief or whoever at the scene, but they would send people out who would work and do what needs to be done, or advise us on what needs to be done and stuff like that for the pipeline. So I would assume that whatever utility company was putting in the battery things would have a team that could be dispatched. Now, how long it would take somebody to get here, I don't know. Whether NYSEG, a lot of times they'll send out a supervisor or one person to make an evaluation and then call in more of their people and resources for whatever's going on. If power lines are down, basically stand by. If the house catches fire, there's not much we can do until NYSEG comes and shuts the power off. So I would think that whatever company that would be in the plan that they would submit that gets reviewed is what they're going to do. One of the things I talked to Will about was access to wherever the site is, that the road or driveway that's put in is big and heavy enough to handle the fire trucks. There's a turnaround or a way to turn the trucks around, that it's kept clear year round. Wintertime, it's got plowed out. So I'm sure they must have people in to check on them, but plowing it wide enough for a pickup is not the same as having a driveway wide enough for a fire truck. Water is an issue. I mean, we don't have hydrants out here. We have to, Speedsville's mapped out a whole bunch of water sites and stuff, but you still have to have trucks. You have to fill them and haul them. And my understanding is that with these batteries, what we're doing basically is cooling the batteries. We're not going to actually put the fire out, and this could go on for a long time, and since we're all volunteers and only have a certain amount of people, I would assume it's going to probably take quite a few other fire departments with their tankers to bring enough water. And so you look down in Brooktondale, the creek runs through there, but it's deep enough that you can't draft. It's more than 12 feet. So all that water runs through there and it's not accessible. So having whatever plan of where the water sources are, or where water can be getting easy, and then whatever toxic, if there's runoff, you're going to put a drainage or a dike system around there. So if there's any toxic, we don't run it down the ditch or into the water table and pollute somebody's their well or whatever. I mean, I think we're talking thousands of gallons of water, depending on the size, to
Right.
to cool that down. And I think the one in Arizona, they were out there for like 3 days, 4 days, something like that. So, I mean, that would put a real strain on just the 3 departments here to run that much water for that many hours without bringing in other departments and things like from even out of the county, I would think, to keep something like that going. And if they're requiring sprinkler systems, they're gonna have a well, they're gonna have to tank, they're gonna have to pressurize it. I mean, so Doug speak, I'm sure he's got some.
Doug, you're muted right
Yeah.
now. There we go.
The only thing I would say is if it's any kind of incident, it's gonna turn into a huge incident right away. And you're gonna need a hazmat team, probably the closest one would be in the city. And the state would have to bring in people. This will explode into a giant event in no time. You're gonna have to keep the press away, and you're gonna need a PIO person for that. It will grow very fast. And although we might be trained, we don't have the people or resources to man it, like Greg says. So that will make it an expanding incident rapidly. And you can't expect the first responders to show up to be adequately trained. They're just going to stand back and say, what do we do next? Or what do we do first? Because you don't want to make a mistake on the first shot. So they're going to call the count, who responds first, or whoever's in charge is going to call the county and raise the red flag and say, send me resources that know what they're doing. And then it expands from there. So a lot of it will fall back on the county. It'll become a county event. There's no doubt in my mind. Then it'll become a statewide event.
So to develop on that, to what extent is it a county thing, or, should we lean more heavily on the developer? Because their number and emergency contact is supposed to be posted prominently at the site. Or is it more appropriate for this to be a municipal function that indeed you call the county?
Well, the whoever owns it, they're not going to have a staff of people sitting there 24 hours. Whoever, they could be in another part of the state or another part of the country. Yeah, we'll fly somebody in, but it's going to take a day or two for them to get there. So I wouldn't expect any kind of immediate response from anybody, from as far as the owners. So it's gonna, if you want a rapid response, it's gonna be from the county. So although this is a town project, I don't know if it's on the county radar yet. Because if it's here, it'll be there.
Right. Well, and Greg, you mentioned, essentially that any training should be countywide. Was that because you expected fire departments, if this was an event happening, say in Caroline, we're still going to have Dryden responding and Danby responding because it's such a big event?
Right. An average house fire right now takes 7 fire departments to get enough people to fight a regular house fire, depending, especially in the middle of the day. So an event like this, the the city, the hazmat team is a county team, but it's the city is the one that provides the people. The county provides a truck and a trailer and some equipment, and then the city provides the rest of the people. So they have a hazmat team that would be involved. But yeah,
Marnell has some resources too. I'm
right.
sure they'll draw on.
So,
Okay.
but really, yeah, it should be a county-wide, because if somebody builds one out here, you can be sure that there are going to be others in the county. I mean, you look at all the number of solar farms like in Enfield, I mean, all around this. So it's not going to be the only town that has it. So I would think what is it, the group of TCOG or whatever,
Peacock, right.
that would be, this would be something they should take up. And so that if people are writing codes or laws, that they are somewhat kind of, I mean, there may be little differences for each municipality, but overall, there's the code here and the standards, the code, I mean, the code officers have to be trained. So maybe it'd be worthwhile to have somebody come in and train all the code officers at once to the same standard.
Right.
And with the fire departments, countywide, with the Office of Fire Protection Control, I'm sure they're gonna have some training. We could do through the Chiefs Association, a countywide training, or offer it to all the departments. So everybody is trained the same. So for hazmat, when they train our departments, a lot of what we're trained for is we show up, observe, and we know what resources to call in and the more experts. I mean, we can train to a certain level, but a lot of this is ongoing training and a lot of hours involved to do that. So what we train to recognize the hazard, recognize the problem, and know who to call to get things going. So Doug's right, this is going to be a big incident. And if it happens somewhere, the media is going to show up. So you need to have a place in your whatever, but this is an overall plan that you have a public information officer, somebody at the town hall, and have all the reporters go there and not to the scene, because all of a sudden they show up, firefighters are here. There's going to be a lot of people if it's going to take a long time to put and a lot of water. So it gets really involved very quickly, and it gets to be, and you know, the thing is, the county, the other fire departments still have to answer other calls. So now maybe if we take everything out of this end of the town of Caroline, then you bring in Waltonville, Richford, Hartford, some of them to cut, maybe Berkshire to cover this end of the town. If you bring people from all over Dryden, they'll bring Cortland in. So now you not only have involved Tompkins County, you have Portland County, Tioga County, maybe on the, if it's up towards Trumansburg, you're going to bring in, you know, counties from there. So it gets to be, it's not just a small, because from what I've read and looked at the webinar and some other stuff, this is a time consuming thing. And, you know, maybe it's just standing back, putting gallons of water on something to cool it down, but just on a house fire, to run tank trucks and personnel to set up where they dump, and safety people and all that can take up to 14 people just to run that one operation. And that doesn't count the people on the hose. If it's 90+ degree weather and they're in full turnout gear, they get heat stroke and all, so you have to rotate them out. They're only can do this for X number, half an hour, whether they have to have air packs or whatever, they have to be rotated out. You have to have rehab. I mean, that's what happens on a regular house fire. So
Right.
talk something that's going to go for days. So the companies that are responsible for this, there should be some in there that reimbursement for, maybe we don't get paid because we're volunteers, but fuel, cost of if we use stuff to dike up exorbitants, things like that, like gas line, things like that. Those companies are responsible for, but they're also responsible for kind of reimbursing the departments for those supplies.
Okay.
If we're talking, 3-4 days, a long time, I mean, our truck, if we're pumping full out, we get about, takes about 8 gallons an hour of diesel to run that fire truck. So you out to a whole bunch of trucks and you're pumping, and then you're taking your trucks and dumping and going around, and then the people are there gonna have to be rotated out. They gotta be fed. I mean, it gets to be a big involved incident pretty quickly. And then the town, I mean, incident like that's gonna make the news. There's gonna be questions asked and things like that. So whoever's gonna give out information,
Yeah, there needs to be.
try not to do that from the fire department at the scene, because we're busy with other stuff. It should come from the town, or sometimes the company will have a spokesman that will work with to give up, because people are going to be worried, are there fumes? They're going to drift down. Is it toxic to my animals? Is the water running off? Is it going to damage my well? I mean, the Brooktondale substation is up on a hill. Any water eventually is going to run down. There's a creek there. Those are all questions people are gonna, and they're gonna want clear, precise answers from people, and not, well, we'll check into it or maybe, but I mean, you need to say yes or no, or the best you can. So I mean, that all needs to be worked out.
Excellent. What you've been saying was reminding me that they did talk in the webinar about, the fire departments. And again, they were more, I think, often thinking of more urbanized areas and professional companies. But, once the fire is sort of out, but still needs to be worked on, they don't want to say hang out for all that time. And so they talked about something called a qualified subject matter expert to monitor and control the site for that duration of that, again, that lengthy period of maybe throwing a little more water on. Well, again, I don't think we have any of those around here either. And later on, someone asked them about whether there are any remediation teams in Western New York, and this guy said not that I'm aware of. So I think that this, experts to help out or other teams are going to be very few and far between, as you guys have pointed out.
Yeah, sometimes they'll hire their specialized teams that will come in and clean up like a toxic site or whatever. And so those are companies they'll bring in to do that. But yeah, I don't know where they're located or how long you're talking for them to get there. So that'd be up to the company that's doing it. Now, if these are, I don't know, if NICEC is going to own these things, if it's on their substation, or if they contract with another company and they are going to build the thing and monitor it and take care of it. Those things need to be clear, because what we've run into is that there's two different groups, and if something happens, it's this group says, well, it's because NICEC didn't do this, and NICEC says no, because this guy didn't do this, and then it's back and forth of who's responsible for whatever. So I think it needs to be cleared out, or very clear, that if this is the company that's doing it, they have a team already that they know they're not going to be sitting there, but they can call them, and they're trained to come in and clean up the site and take care of the water and that stuff, and if it's long term. But I don't think there's any companies close by that have the apparatus or for water and all that for long term. So the fire departments are going to be there long time, from what I've read and seen so far.
Yeah, and I think that seems likely, again, particularly in our situation, it's going to be a day or two maybe before other help arrives. But all right, let me ask you guys a few specific questions that we as a planning board had discussed, that mainly I think came from Will talking to you, Greg. But so in terms of the access, so I hear you saying, yeah, it needs to be a good sturdy road with enough turnaround space at the end. One thing we were musing on is whether there should be essentially two routes of access, so that if the one becomes blocked, I don't know how likely that is, but that's the question, is do we require the facility to have two different ways to get in off the road? Or is it indeed, if it simply is, make sure you've got one darn good road with plenty of space for us, is that good enough?
Well, ideally, I think a loop around would be nice, that you could drive in one and around. And I mean, depending on where the fire, you're only gonna be able to get so close to the thing, but at some point, being able to get close or get off the road with your trucks, or have a wide enough space to work from, and then move the trucks around. And then later on, if somebody comes in to clean up or remediate, if they don't have a good road, things get wet, they get muddy. It just makes it a whole lot harder to do anything without a good access road that would either loop around or something like that. I guess it depends on how big an area they're using, or how much the company uses.
And Doug, any thoughts from you on the access?
No, not really. Just be able to get in and out. Just have to be careful that your road doesn't block you from being able to dam up the location, contain it.
My interest actually is that the site be designed in a way to confine water being used. I know you guys probably put dams and stuff up, but I really think that if it was built in to begin with, that might be better.
Yeah.
For exactly that kind of reason that.
Yeah.
All right.
And maybe you require a retention pond to go with it.
Well, that was the next question. So in terms of water, should we indeed, we could require either tanks or a retention pond or something, a place for, so should there be adequate water on site, to find adequate water to put out the fire? Is that a reasonable requirement for a facility like this, rather than have you guys have to race all over the place looking for water?
Well, NFPA has calculations you can do on that. And depending on the size and the type of facility, you can calculate how much water you should have for an initial response.
Mm-hmm.
If it's really big, you're never going to have enough water on site, but just for that initial response, that can be calculated.
And so again, thinking of Caroline, it seems to me that might be a useful thing to have, since we seem to chronically have some issues with getting, from what I hear from fire, getting ready access to water. So is that a reasonable requirement of a facility that they have a retention pond or something that has enough, according to NFPA guidance, for the initial response?
Unless you put it in Speedsville, we got lots of water.
Okay. All right, and we already talked about the containment around it. All right.
It's something we've been discussing, but never seems to move forward, is expanding the water supplies in the rest of the town. I don't know what the holdup is, but I just got to pick a spot and build it.
Yeah, I hear you, and I know that Chris Jordan's brought that up also at other meetings. Yeah. So I don't know either, if it's a lack of sites or a lack of follow through.
I
All
will
right.
bring that to the board, Doug. I think that's a really important point.
All right. Anybody else on the planning board have direct questions? And Will had asked the question about fire remediation versus fire mitigation. Either of you guys have thoughts on the distinction?
Well, mitigation is more having a plan of what you're going to do to keep things from happening or getting worse. And then the remediation group afterwards is the one that's going to come in and kind of clean things up and, clean the site and all that stuff. My thinking is that the mitigation is more have a plan, have things in place. So either, thing to catch the runoff or diking system to limit toxic things and contaminating things. And the remediation would be now afterwards, if the team comes in and some things leaked and there's some water that's toxic that's gotten to the ground or down towards the street. I mean, you know, when something like this, you're going, the state, the DEC, the state police has a hazmat team. The DEC does, I mean, because those streams, if there are any trout streams or anything like that, the DEC is going to be involved. They're going to know where the runoff is. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people. So mitigation is to have a good plan in place up front. So you don't have to do a lot afterwards. But if anything leaks and runs down, the DEC is going to come down. If there's any trout or fish killed, I mean, if there's anything in anybody's well, that's where those companies, there's something in there that they're going to have to be responsible for either took, you know, what if the groundwater is contaminated, the well's no good, or is that person, that house is going to get water? Who's responsible for providing that? To me, that'd be the company that put in the thing. So that should be figured out. So what, and whatever mediation group they have come in or whatever, if there's water, are they going to do testing? How often are they going to do testing? You know, depending on the soil. Is it clay or is it gravel? How fast is the water going to go down? If it leaks out, there's toxics in it. How far will it travel all the way down and hit the creek in Brooktondale if it's up on Midall Road? Or how many houses or how many wells can it affect? Those are all should be put in whatever, not only for there, but whatever else. I mean, plan wise, because if all of a sudden you have a house and a property and a mortgage and you have no water and you have no easy access to get it,
Yep, that,
I mean, what's going to happen to the, I mean, we've seen that in flooding and things like that. People ended up losing everything. So to me,
Yep.
that's part of the remediation plan, is that there's something in place to protect people nearby if something happens.
do Jonathan, Will, Catherine, you guys have any questions you want to ask?
I have a more, I guess it's a question, but also a general query more than a specific question around, well, first to thank you for coming, for bringing all this information, because I think it's really helpful. For me, it actually has kind of, to be honest, validated some of my own misgivings about this. And I think that, I guess my broad question that comes up for me that I'll throw out to you is, you know, is our town's infrastructure really sufficient or appropriate for this kind of facility? And from what I'm hearing and my understanding even prior to this, but I think even more so with what you're sharing, I'm not sure that it is. And I think that that's okay if that's the determination, to say that this right now, it's wonderful to be future focused. However, you know, I'm hearing a lot of really important concerns about our first responding community and how that would realistically happen in our town. So if you have any thoughts about that now or at any time, and I would welcome it. But that is my overarching question, and I think we you know, we need to be asking that.
Doug, anything you want to say about that? And then Greg? Oh, Doug's busy, it looks like.
Yep, that's a problem. But it's not just a problem for this, it's a problem for everything. So I wouldn't single this part out. It's not just a local problem, it's a state and national problem, that there aren't the people that we need. We're all desperate for more people. We got lots of equipment, nobody to run it. Like Greg says, you know, you get how many fire departments? 7 fire departments from all over the county just to fight one fire. And you probably end up with 10 trucks and 10 people. So we do the best we can with what we have, but it's, you can't isolate it to this problem. It'd be like, it's a bigger issue,
Okay. It's very
unfortunately.
helpful to have that number, that in of itself, to know that that's how many people it takes, or how many different, departments it takes for one house fire, is a pretty vivid image, really.
Yep.
Um,
It's crazy.
So to your point of expanding water supply, generally, that seems to be like, in contrast to this, for example, in my view, or it could be argued, that's a more immediate, like if we expand the water supply as a prerequisite to additional other things, that might be a useful project.
Sure, and it certainly would help reduce, the workload. I mean, if you don't have to travel 10 miles to get a tank full of water, it's always beneficial. But it still takes people. And we can spend a lot of money on trucks and equipment, but if we don't have the people.
There used to be years ago that one department would put enough people for most fires. And if it got big, you might call one or two others. And now from the numbers I looked at, on the average, even around the rest of the county, Dryden has quite a few people, but they're calling in 3 or 4 and 5 departments for fires. So it happens all over. Like Doug says, it's national. There's not enough volunteers anymore. All kinds of things. I think that, so yeah, it's hard to single out just one thing, because there's a whole bunch of other things, but I would think that hopefully you talk to the rest of the towns in the county, and that they all work together to come with some type of state, countywide training and some standards countywide, because things will overlap. I mean, if Dryden has something put in there, we have something, other people. So we're going to get called to all, if there's an incident like this, even if it's not in the town of Caroline, but if it's in one of the other towns that has, we're going to be called there to be involved too. So if it's kind of standardized, or the training, state training, but so people are all kind of trained and they're on the same page, and even the towns and the code officers. I mean, because I've seen companies are real good at, one town has a little lax versus the other town, they're going to go to this town to build things and not the other town. And if it's standard across the whole county and everybody's on the same page and the laws are pretty close or pretty standard, I think you get more universal and better take care of, they may take care of things, but I don't know, it just seems that sometimes if they pick and shop which town to go to, depending on what kind of rules or regulations. And I think this is going to be coming, and I think with all the solars and stuff throughout all the county, that all the towns are going to be facing the same thing at some point. Oh, some may wait until something's getting ready. I think here, you're looking ahead and trying to have something in place before something happens. But I just think TCOG or something, I mean, that would be a conversation maybe the town should have with them. And maybe there's other groups that are working on some of the same stuff, that maybe they have some other ideas or things that we haven't thought of. That would be helpful. So.
Okay. Any other questions? And, Doug and Greg, and thank you for coming, but is there anything you want to still say to us to make sure that we're thinking about? Any last thoughts?
No, I think you're asking a lot of good questions and stuff, and that webinar with all the different codes and everything that are listed and stuff. And I would just hope that, you can reach out to the other towns and see if their planning groups or whatever are working on If not, maybe give them an idea that they ought to start looking at it, because I think this is going to be coming and be widespread. And if something happens, it's like Doug said, it's going to become a big incident and it's going to involve a whole lot of people. So the more people that are aware of this and can take training and stuff, then I think the better off we'll all be.
I think that's an excellent suggestion.
Yeah, I agree.
The only thing I would say is, when you talk about water supply, maybe the towns, that there's a lot of ponds. People are digging ponds all the time. If maybe give them some kind of incentive to allow us to put a dry hydrant on their pond. Something like that, or at least give us access to their pond. There, I mean, I know of some locations that have ponds, and they said, we went up to their house, knocked on their door, can we use your pond in the event of a fire? And they said no. So even if it's your house, and they said, well, we'll think about it.
Yeah.
So
Boy.
I know Brooktondale had a fire a couple of years ago in the winter, and there was a pond there at the house they didn't know about. It was frozen over. And they could have used it. So I go on the county website for GIS, and where you can fly over property, and there's a lot of water there that we could be taking advantage of that we don't.
Is that something that like a town, I don't know anything about this. This is a really great suggestion. Like we would make a town survey of ponds that are with permission ponds or something with the
Yeah,
town.
I mean, each one you have to review it, whether or not it's accessible, or
Okay.
you don't want to destroy their property just to get water. But like where Brian Hunt lives on Fire Tower Road, or
Yeah.
Blackman Hill, we put one on his pond. And we can just pull into his driveway and it's right there. We put one in Kenny Hammond's pond. And it's to their benefit.
Right.
So
I will bring
why
that
not?
up. Yeah.
Because, like Greg said, the streams, you can't count on the streams being deep enough. If we get a lot of rain, they're fine. But if it starts to get dry, they're too shallow to draw water from. And then we got to travel that much further. So
How deep or big does a pond need to be useful for you?
I don't know. To be honest, we have to calculate it.
Okay. It's a great agenda. I will bring this up.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, again, thank you both very much. I know everyone has busy schedules, and you guys have really made some time for us, and I appreciate that. So thank you. Lots of good
Okay.
thoughts out of the meeting, and I'll let you guys go so you can get back to your lives, and the rest of us
Okay.
will keep meeting for a while.
All right. See ya.
Thank you.
Both.
John, did you have a comment? It looked like you were about to say something.
Well, I had a question. I was going to follow up on your question to them. They just said, I don't know how much. I was going to ask, how much water does a fire truck hold? I mean, to fill their truck one time,
That's a great question.
does it
Right.
take? And then you could start doing some calculations, but without that, it doesn't.
Right. I mean, this is such a important, it's like easy kind of agenda item.
Well, I remember
Which
when we did the workshop for the comp plan at the fire station in Brooktondale,
Yeah.
this came up.
Yeah,
The specific idea of there need to be more dry hydrants. That is basically, I guess, tubes down in the water that they can hook their stuff up to
Right.
in the town. And of course, indeed, nothing. I mean, I think it keeps being talked about, but nothing happens.
right. I mean, the thing I remember hearing about even more than the permission to access was people wanting like a tax benefit, reducing taxes if you have a pond. And that seems like it's just keeps getting discussed, but that's not gonna, independent from a change.
So-
I mean, just having access to water seems, not for batteries, just for a general.
So-
Right.
So if you go out to the Speedsville Fire Department Facebook page, you can watch a video of them filling their portable 2,000 gallon pool, which is part of how they replenish their water supply. So 2,000 gallons, is ballpark. Irene brought up about the need for dry hydrants at several town board meetings. So you might check in with her. She's already looked into it quite a bit, but
Okay,
I don't know to what extent.
I'll check. Yeah, that's
Okay.
it's great having them.
Yeah, I'm glad they, and Doug said he wasn't sure, but he would try, and he definitely tried and got here. So that was great. And Chris seems to be really busy. So I was sorry to miss him, but he seemed like it was gonna be really hard to get him in at any time, so. All right, so the next agenda item is actually what the planning board's gonna be doing besides the battery law. And Catherine, you guys probably had some discussion about that at your last board meeting. I don't.
The discussion remains the same as I believe you are familiar with.
Okay, okay, I didn't know anything changed. I wasn't tuned in. All right.
So the charge is that, whatever you three decide you want to work on, that, there'd be close collaborative communication with the zoning commission. And that, while the planning board itself is not officially part of the zoning commission, that, whatever the issue is that you want to pursue, that the ask is that there be a focus and an eye towards like, how does this fit into land use and planning and zoning, given that that's what's kind of going on.
Yeah, and I'll even take it a half step further, which is, I would plan to reach out to, the chair of the zoning commission and sort of say, how can we help you?
Exactly.
Sort of thing.
Exactly.
And what I know, she heard about from Tim was critical environmental areas and sort of telecommunications siting,
Mhm.
and that she responded favorably to. And as I think I mentioned in an email to you, Catherine, I would probably throw in also the notion about whether the town wanted to encourage maintenance of open space by giving conservation easements that gave, a tax break for properties that were kept as open space rather than developed,
Right.
which would be a pretty big land use change
Yeah.
if the town were to adopt something.
Right.
So-
Right. Yep.
Off the top of my head, those are the three, and I would want to contact the zoning commission though to see what else. So, okay. So with that, I'm going to make this suggestion, but this is open for debate because I don't want to make anyone do they don't want to do. Jonathan, I was hoping that you would take on the initial research on CEAs, critical environmental areas, and that would mean, really understand, what are they, what function are they? Because it doesn't mean you can't do anything here. I believe it's sort of a mitigation hazard sort of stuff. But at any rate, what are they? What are the criteria for establishing it? What's the procedure for establishing them? And because all that's out there, but I don't know what it is. And then you can get that back to us. That seemed like
I can research that.
And Will, so growing out of the cell tower development on, the hill there, came the idea that, we know that cell service sucks in Caroline, but, the companies are going to do what they want for their own purposes. And that wouldn't necessarily map out to the best coverage of Caroline in a sort of a rational sense. And so the idea was, can we come up with a scheme, because it's hard to site these towers, that makes, that gives the town the best coverage with the minimum towers, that also respects individual property rights, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very thorny, multi-valued thing. But, you know, it was, can we have a telecommunications plan? And
Strategic plan.
strategic plan. Yes, I think the word strategic was Catherine. So it was, you know, and so I was thinking that might fall well with your engineering background, but it may be not something you're interested in taking on. But I think you also are very concerned about the internet access, and I think that some of that could be folded in as well. Both these issues face certain preemption issues. So I think there's a lot of federal preemption on cell tower siting, and there certainly has been some state preemption on the internet rollout because they've contracted with, you know, Spectrum, and then Spectrum has had its problems or whatever. So, you know, I honestly don't know how much role the town can play, but I'd like to find out. And these are perennial problems for Caroline residents. You know, no cell service and shitty, you know, internet, right? I mean, some people know, but you know, for a lot of people. And so if we could actually solve that problem, wouldn't that be nice? So that would involve looking into, okay, what are the federal preemptions, you know, what's available to town, and how do one actually go about deciding, like, you know, would this be a master's project for a Cornell MN student to you know, come up with an array of antennas, or is there a company you hire that goes out and figures this stuff? I don't know. So that would be sort of the ask there as well. And so that.
So you're really talking digital communications. It's not just telecommunications and not just internet, right?
Right.
Because they all use each other's facilities.
Right. If I could
Sure.
jump in, the
Yeah,
idea
please.
of the strategy behind the strategic planning, which was not present at the time of the Bald Hill project, is that, as Bill said, I mean, the siting currently, the siting in the absence of a strategic plan, the siting goes something like, we need a willing landowner, not something like, that's how it goes. We need a willing landowner, right? And so there might be a location that would be better in terms of service delivery for the town. But if you don't have a willing landowner, it doesn't really matter. And so the tower is going to go where the person allows it to. And so what kept coming up in these discussions from the people who were opposed to the siting of the tower was, if we're going to have some big ugly thing, it might as well be a big ugly thing that provides service to the, you know, highest number of people. So for, if that's helpful at all, that the priority, I mean, there's all the preemption and the, like, what service is possible in the town, which to me is a separate issue, partly from strategic siting of stuff. Like, would we, like, in my mind, we'd have a map of, like, if we had our druthers, these are preferred sites that the town has decided for this stuff, whatever the stuff is. And it might not have much teeth, but we have, you know, legal teeth, so to speak, but we have all sorts of other things in the town that don't have legal teeth, but it's some place to start.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take a shot at it and bring something. Who do I bring it to? Here?
Yeah,
To
here.
planning board?
Yeah, because
Okay.
I mean, this is initial research, and then these are we're gonna be working on, you know, for the next 6 months or whatever, you know. I mean, some of them will be faster than others, but, you know, like this might, again, require hiring someone, in which case we have to talk about money and what money's available, or it might be we can get someone at Cornell to do some free work for us. I just don't know the answer.
Well, IEEE's been offering a lot of free webinars to the Telecommunications Society members lately. So I'll see what they're offering.
Okay, great, awesome. And then the last piece, I will offer to do the initial foray because I know Danby was working on it. And so if I just make some contacts there, I can at least figure out where they got to in their research, if they decided to implement something on, you know, ways to preserve open space, because that was a big concern for them. So my initial research will be to figure out what Danby, you know, decided to do or not do and why, and that kind of stuff.
Bill, to your point about the Cornell, I mean, there's Cornell involvement with working on it, but also one thing that came up was citing the things on Cornell land and engaging in some sort of a collaborative partnership around that. And I don't know
Okay.
what the first steps would be there if you have ideas, but that was, we have a lot of that was what came up in lots of meetings around the Bald Hill Tower was, why can't we put it on Cornell land?
Yeah. Like, they have there's natural areas up there, which is, I don't know how that actually works, whether it's Cornell land or whether it's the, Cornell natural area is
Botanic Gardens.
Botanic Gardens, right? So which is somewhat separate, but at any rate, granted, right.
Places where people do not live.
Right.
And do not need to look at things.
Yeah. And so for me, that's the other thing to fold in is that ideally this is not located next to someone's house, right? Not just because it's ugly, but because I think there's some unresolved questions about if you're living that close to a powerful transmitter, what are the long-term implications for your health, So ideally, it's a very multivariate optimization thing of you want to cover the town well while being as far as possible from people's houses on land that it's actually possible to do. So,
So it might be good to develop a strategy that's more land-based and not wireless-based.
Well, I mean, internet, I would go with not wireless, but of course, cell phones are wireless and I don't know about other telecommunications technologies, I mean.
Yeah, but they don't, not,
Okay, maybe it looks like I have to be educated.
I'll tell you what, we'll start with a small presentation about how you actually get your telephone call.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good.
Without cell service, there are people who get cell service at my house if I let them use my satellite service.
Okay, well, there's that. And I know you had some, issue with the cell tower that's up there and why it's not servicing us. And so you can get your teeth into a lot of things here and your fingers in a lot of stuff.
The latest estimate, by the way, is end of next month. It'll be in service.
Okay.
So I actually want to make a comment outside of, it's on this topic, but outside of the three areas you mentioned. And I've been giving it a lot of thought, so I'll probably show up at the June 22nd zoning commission meeting and just say something as a member of the public. So you remember that I gave a talk, a small presentation on age-friendly, and it was part of a zoning workshop of best practices? Well, there's a whole trajectory now to recognize the need for social infrastructure in rural areas. And if you look at some of the items that I picked up in my survey and that the planning board picked up in their workshops, there are several items that are really comments about social infrastructure. And so I'm working on how to say something in 3 minutes to the zoning commission. But I really want to speak up and say that, social infrastructure is being neglected. And when you're relying on volunteers to run your government, it might not be a good idea to ignore that in your strategic planning.
Okay, I absolutely talk to them. Like I said, I'm going to sort of take my lead from the zoning commission on what would be helpful to them. And if they decide that some more work on that and they don't have the bandwidth to do it would be helpful, then that's something we'll take on. And that's, I think, the plan for the next year is that we're like the extra hand that they need.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention it so you're not left going, well, why didn't she say something to us when we're talking about it?
Yeah, I very much appreciate that. That's great. And anything else that any of us think about that, hey, maybe this would be good or useful, let that percolate up and we can bounce it back and forth with the zoning commission and decide, you know, how much energy effort to put into it. I think that sounds good. All right. So the next item on the agenda is meetings. So June marked the last sort of regularly scheduled meeting that I had set up originally. And partly because usually summertime schedules get all different, but now it's just the 3-4 of us. And so the question is, what do you want to do for a meeting schedule? Do you want to stick with the second Thursday? Do you want to stick with 5:30? Or is a different schedule for at least, you know, July, August useful? You know, so I'd like to set the schedule at least for July and August. And if maybe regularly, we can just do the rest of the year. So do people have preferences on meeting night, meeting time?
I'm pretty flexible. I can deal with anything. I probably would prefer an afternoon meeting if I don't know if any of us have day jobs at this point, but you know, evening meetings interrupt dinner and sort of Mary Alice and I are usually doing something together, which isn't a problem. I mean, these don't happen all that often, but I'm just saying I'm equally open to evening and even preferably afternoon.
Yeah, I think Catherine, you have daytime commitments,
I
right?
have a job.
Right, but we could do an evening meeting instead of a 5:30 if 7 or 7:30 would work better in terms of not interrupting dinner, or even 8. You know, I don't want to go too much later because you know, hour and a half, 2 hours meeting length seems
For me, 5:30 is fine. It's easier to eat afterwards and not be interrupted for the rest of the evening than to, you know, have the meeting start at 8 o'clock. And
Yeah, okay. And Catherine, for you, is 5:30 kind of the earliest, or if we want to go to 5, is that possible?
No, I mean, I would say, to be honest, I don't know how essential I really am, given my liaising role. I mean, my schedule is dictated during the school year by student crises. So it's like 5 could be equivalently fine to 5:30 and could also be equivalently not fine, which is just to say, maybe don't schedule around me, but my day technically ends at 5.
Okay. And you are, or will soon be, going into campus, is that right?
We are going back
Starting when?
July 26th.
Whoa,
That's all I have to say about that on this recording.
No, I'm,
it's really soon.
yeah, no, it's
July 26th is our mandate.
Yeah. No, it's too soon, but I will say that on the recorded line, it's too soon. And
I
we'll,
may have something going on July 8th. I'm sorry, I can't narrow it down, but I might be, you know, driving to an airport.
well, we can always schedule around that. So what I'm hearing is that we're probably going to be sitting at 5:30 still. So that's better than going later in the evening, and we can't go any earlier. And that roughly second Thursdays other than July 8th are probably still fine. Is that okay?
I mean,
So,
really after 5 should be fine. Like, I'm done with work. I'm just saying there's going to be times that I'm not, and it's not going to matter if it's 5:30 or 6.
no, but if you're at campus leaving at 5, you won't be home till 5:30, right?
No, yeah, that's the earliest. Great, good point. That's the earliest I will be in Brooktondale, would be if I'm out.
Unless you wanted to Zoom from your office, but I don't know. If you have no interest in doing that, huh?
I would do it if I had to.
All right. Okay.
But that's the other question: is we're going to be meeting in person? Are we, or are we continuing to Zoom?
Well, so I guess we'll see. My intention for the foreseeable future is to meet over Zoom,
Okay.
unless and until there is a countywide plan or the governor mandates in-person meetings again.
Okay.
I kind of like in-person meetings. It's way easier on me actually to run a meeting where I see people face to face, but my wife and I are being very careful. So we're not going to do a lot of indoor stuff with people, particularly if there's potential attendees of.
You're not going to want to see
status.
me. I'm going to be contaminated.
Well, yeah. Well, there's that issue, but more. I mean, honestly, I mean, not that's probably a huge deal, but if you have a public meeting where anyone can walk in, I mean, potentially we could require proof of vaccination status. Right, so that's a possibility, but I don't know if we'd actually do that. And, you know, so if we have to assume that we don't know the vaccination status of people who are attending the meeting,
We are not
outside
going to
the-
know the vaccination status.
right? So I'm going to hold off as long as possible.
Okay.
And you know, until we're really clear there's not going to be a fall surge, that Delta doesn't get here, that whatever, you know, blah, da, 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 da. That's my take on it. But at some point, the governor may mandate differently, and then either I will do that or you'll have a different chairperson.
Well, then if in that case, then certainly if it's getting late, I would Zoom from work, and then that would be actually easier.
So
So
we will see. Okay, so how about then, I guess we'll meet July 15th, since the 8th is a problem. Does the 15th look okay to folks?
Good.
And then we'll go back to second Thursdays in August and the rest of through the fall. And then we'll see where we're at. Okay. All right. So do people have the time and energy to want to begin looking at the battery law now that we're almost at 7 o'clock? I'm okay either way. You know, I wouldn't want to go past 7:30. If people want to make an initial foray at it, or if we'd rather just do it all in one fell swoop next time, I'm okay either way.
I'm good. You know, you saw my list.
I saw your list. It was lengthy but brief at the same time. So
I tried.
yeah. So, all right. So yeah, if you guys have a little bit of energy and bandwidth for this, let's start, because I want to get a sense of what concerns you're going to bring forward, Will. I don't have your list in front of me. I'm going to share screen of the
We'll be
law.
right back in just a moment.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Time to get out your beer or
Yeah.
wine.
Well, you know, and we'll just, again, we'll give this a go for a while. So hope you guys, let's see. Oh no, I need to make the view larger probably. Let's go to page width version. All right, is that legible to you guys?
yeah,
All right, and let me see, I pull up. All right. So I almost didn't quite find the time to do another version color coded where I put, again, the yellow is, what did I say? The yellow is when I took it from our solar energy siting law, and the non-highlighted basically comes from the NYSERDA model law. And what would probably been most useful is if I had the alternate text right next door, so we could just compare the two in case you wanted to. I didn't get around to that. If that would be helpful, we can go back and do that kind of version, or hopefully you guys maybe spend some time looking at the alternate. But, you know, I thought we did some good work on the solar law. And so there were times when it seemed more thorough than what was in the NYSERDA wording. This purpose phrasing is very similar to what's in the NYSERDA law anyway.
So
Yeah.
Bill, in the purpose, it says it's in the public interest to encourage battery storage systems. It's the second to the last, or it is the last sentence.
Yeah.
Second
Mhm.
to the last. Because they play an important role supporting energy generation from renewable sources. That seems a little narrow to me. Don't they provide a load balancing ability that makes the whole grid more reliable, whether or not it's renewable energy?
Okay. I think point well taken. I mean, I was indeed thinking they help with renewable because you can store it, but you're right. They help in grid stability in general.
So you could just
But they're
add,
only needed for grid stability because of the renewable sources.
Yeah.
So,
And it will play in, I don't know.
but yeah,
and-
it's okay.
and improving grid reliability or grid stability.
Mm.
All right, so you guys can also think about that wording. What is, or add, we can add some other things here. I'll turn that, purple is what I was using or something. Try, oh, this would be a different color. Oh, I see, I'm in the wrong. I want to do this. Never edit on Zoom. Magenta. Oh, then it took it away. Okay, I don't want to waste all the time on that. All right.
You got it.
All right. And at some point, Will, I know we'll come across one of the things that you had a question about. So this, again, and both laws had stuff on applicability, basically saying this applies to systems built from now on, yeah, but not if they're modified just a little bit. And I can't, I added this part from our, yeah. So that was just the fact that if it's discontinued and they come back online, they will be, subject to this law. Now, there are no such systems in this town, right? So these not large ones. There are, I'm sure, a handful of small battery storage systems, but those really, again, I forgot this, I got to send you guys, but this is going to be like a one-page permit type application for a home system.
So I don't have wording to offer, but it occurred to me that it would be good to acknowledge somewhere in the applicability section, maybe, that the batteries, the battery system may or may not be part of another generating facility.
Okay, right. So that.
So I'm just thinking about it. I'm sorry to be so vague, but I think it should be acknowledged.
Yeah. So so yeah, I mean, the batteries could be part of a general system, and the coal-fired plant over here, and their gas plant there, and their solar cells over here, right? I mean, is that the sort of thing you mean, that it's not just an only battery facility, but it's going to apply if they have battery storage at a facility that's generating power?
Yeah, they're generally referred to as hybrid facilities, but I don't know if that's, too close to being just lingo.
I'll have to look up wording. Okay, so that will be the note to accept some wording on that.
So the applicability would be to the battery storage system part of a hybrid installation.
Right. Got it. Okay. So I tried to clean up the definitions a little bit, but I brought agricultural land and stuff in because I didn't know in the end if that was going to come up later in the law, and I can't now remember. So at some point we have to go through and make sure there's no superfluous definitions in here. But a lot of these definitions were what they had in the NYSERDA law. And I added nameplate capacity because that's sort of, again, the language we had used in the solar siding law, because they just said capacity. And I guess, again, you know.
I'm not sure that that distinction is as meaningful for batteries as it was for the solar, because the
It's
solar,
not as, right.
you know, the amount of energy that they would produce is much less than their nameplate capacity operated, you know, whereas the battery is not a fixed.
The rate of discharge can affect the capacity, and Will, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. Is one of the things that, you know, so it still is, you know, they're nominally a certain capacity under certain conditions. So that's why I put the nameplate capacity in there.
Okay.
But I agree, it's a smaller distinction than for.
So the agricultural land part,
Yeah.
I'm thinking probably we will end up finding it might be superfluous.
Yes, and we'll check that.
Okay.
And the only way that we might not, and this was something I was going to propose, hadn't gotten around to yet, is while I think it's unlikely that a battery energy storage facility is going to cover more than 2.5 acres, I think it's possible. And since that's the threshold at which we had stricter considerations in the solar law, I was wondering, and that's going to propose that later in the meeting, that we discuss adding a section that says, and if the facility disturbs more than 2.5 acres, you must also do X, Y, and Z. And those X, Y, and Z are all the extra requirements that we placed on the large solar electric. So maybe we can just discuss that topic now, which may take the rest of our time. So,
I have a thought. I know I'm not supposed to say a whole lot, but I guess
that's okay.
Enter in service to my general query that I asked the chiefs, right, about what realistically are we doing here? And what is the realistic ask of our community should a facility of this, you know, type show up? I really find myself asking whether or not, I mean, I think we should have this law. I don't mean to be like the Debbie
No.
naysayer.
It could be the law says they can't be located in Caroline.
Well, I mean, so there's that, or the law says, when you're talking about size now, right? When I'm hearing you talking about this thing is going to be 2.5 acres, like, to me, that's getting out of what could be argued to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, to be honest, right? I mean, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the hazard mitigation in the event of a fire. I mean, you know, that whole conversation, which I think is obviously super important, is only like if things go badly. we're not really talking about. I'm just trying to imagine as you know, a council person, this thing being brought to the town and being brought for a public hearing and being brought to the review board. And, you know, I think at a certain size, I'm not sure that we would be able to say this is something we want in a town. So I guess I wonder what your thoughts are about that in terms of how the law is written.
Right, because it could just say, you know, such facilities shall not cover more than 2.5 acres, right? That would be another. So in terms of the hazards, you know, one of them definitely is the energy, like the kilowatt hour number, right? But I agree that physical size may also be, because like if a bunch of these are covering a lot of the landscape and there's like a sequential failure, then you got a big area being under whatever, right? So I don't know, you know, this again, the code standards are supposed to prevent exactly that kind of thing, that one building is not supposed to get the other building on fire. But
right. What I'm hearing from their presentation is that the code, our current knowledge, is not sufficient to really.
Well, I think what I was hearing is that they have really no clue how to tackle that. They can't tackle this because they don't have the manpower or the expertise.
Right, and through no fault of theirs. I mean, I want to be really
no,
clear.
I'm not dissing them. I'm
is
saying
not-
that the realistic picture of Caroline is, you know, and this has been a perennial concern, that there's a decline in the number of volunteer fire people, right? So I get that. At any rate, so good question. And again, I don't know to what extent physical acreage cover is or you just want to limit the kilowatt hour amount. And I don't know the answer.
I did hear the fire chief say that, yeah, there's a bunch of hazards here and they're understaffed but they also fairly strongly said there's nothing unique about this.
right, they did.
There's lots of hazards that can be as challenging as this, and that it would be a little bit odd to single it out and say no. But I agree that 2.5 acres sounds huge for a battery.
I think it's really unlikely to happen. Really, really unlikely to happen. But it was more consistency. And what if someone did want us like sprinkle a whole bunch of containers over 5 acres of land? And, you know, I don't know, right? I'm building a law for, you know, but we could just ignore that, which is how I started, because like, it's just, they're not going to be that big in area, but.
Well, it occurred to me that rather than the type of, the amount of land or type of land, it might be more important to consider how close to critical areas they might be wanting to locate because of the fire hazard, which is a different consideration. And I don't know if that's something we can consider.
So when you say critical area, what do you mean?
If you have an area that has something unique in it, and can we say not too close to that area, assuming that there could potentially be an event where you actually cannot adequately restore the surrounding land after an event.
And
maybe a zoning question.
Well, I think so. So my first, you know, again, I'm no expert, but my guess based on other kinds of things guys answered is that not without zoning. Basically all regions of the town to be treated as roughly the same, but you know, we still have flood areas and stuff. So there was some wishy-washiness about that. But my guess is that until we have zoning, we probably can't say not within X feet of Y, probably, but I don't really know for sure. And I didn't know if by critical you meant like, you know, you might not want them very close to houses because the houses might also catch on fire, versus you might not want it next to this unique environment because you can't restore it if it's destroyed. So I didn't know what you meant by critical. That's why I asked that question.
Bill, somewhere down further into this, on the same topic though, it was talking about the point of the statement was to ask for a mitigation plan if it was close to a critical environmental area. But I didn't like the way it was written because it was sort of it read that of course they could do it if they only would give us a good mitigation plan. Whereas it should, I'd rather see language that said such a thing could only be accepted if a mitigation plan was found, sufficient by the site review.
Okay, keep that. Hold us, flag that when we get there. That sounds great. So to Catherine's question, yeah. So do we put a limit either in kilowatt hours or physical size, acreage coverage on these things for Caroline? I mean, so yeah, I'm half tempted to say, we just aren't ready. We just couldn't. This is a disaster waiting to happen, except that, again, the facilities don't usually go wrong. But I do think, yeah, we could not possibly really handle it with the staff that we have in Caroline currently. They would have to call in elsewhere. And it would, to me, therefore, the key part of the law is where it says, basically training and resources have to be provided by the company to fight this. And so maybe it has to say, and they could get a rapid response team there within 4 hours of being notified, or, I don't know what the right language is, but either it's you don't have them, or there has to be something safe like that. And I am, not wanting to disallow them just because I think we might actually lose that battle. I don't think the state would uphold that anyway. The court would uphold that.
Well, I looked around at the projects going up and RFPs that utilities have put out. And what I see is that if NYSEG were to try to build a battery site to improve the grid stability, like locating it near the substation, the size would likely be under 10 megawatt hours. And if what I've seen is that the battery sizing at hybrid installations tends to be fairly small compared to the size of the solar or wind installation. So you might have a couple hundred megawatts of solar or wind, and you would only see 30 to 50 megawatt hour battery installation. So just to give you some idea of what people are designing currently.
Right. But I'm trying to anticipate the future. But I mean, with again, if we were to cap the size, I wouldn't know offhand a rational way to say, okay, there can't be bigger than 100 megawatt hour system in Caroline. I mean, that's a number I pulled out of the air. That's so I literally wouldn't know how to put a number that was reasonable. Other than I wouldn't, like I say, it's bigger than the things they're likely to do. So, whereas a space size, I have some sense of, because again, there's environmental issues. As it's not a big deal, frankly, to destroy an acre of something, because there tends to be a lot of acres in Caroline. But once you start getting up into multiple acres, particularly if it's a critical habitat, that gets to be a bigger deal. So I have an easier time setting a size in terms of area, just because the state has given some guidance in terms of the environmental impact assessment forms. But
because these facilities are going to presumably be much smaller than a solar farm or community solar, I think we can be a lot more strict about, thou shalt not impact these critical areas, because they should be finding some place to put it shouldn't be as challenging. And solar farms, because they want to be so big, are more likely to be bumping up against one, even though most of the site is acceptable.
From environments or whatever. Okay. Yeah, that seems reasonable. All right.
So critical environments and unique areas, I don't know, maybe they're.
Well, so we have what are called unique natural areas. It's a Tompkins County designation, but it carries with it just the acknowledgement that they're somewhat special. There is no zero legal protection based on that. It's just a thing. But that's actually, and even the state designated critical environment. This is what John's got to find out for us more is, when I poked into it briefly, the critical environmental areas things just says, okay, this is to alert, a developer or whatever, that there's something special here they have to be really careful about. It doesn't say they can't go across it, but they have to make sure that they mitigate problems. And I think that's what you're going to find, but that's what I want Jonathan to poke around and, so okay. We may never be able to say, no, you can't even be in a critical environmental area. There may be no legal, but again, maybe there is. That's why Jonathan's been stuck on that.
Okay. I've made a note.
All right. So agreed. I mean, that's, it'd be a shame. These facilities are relatively compact. They're relatively energy dense. They really ought to be able to stay away from anything sensitive. I agree.
Yeah, and I wouldn't take a maximum area out of our solar law just because they don't need that much area. The maximum could be a lot smaller, I think, and still encompass any reasonable sized battery installation.
Okay. And I know I had those numbers at one time, and Will, you probably have them somewhere, but maybe for next meeting, just remind us of, for these tens of megawatts or 100 megawatt facility, how many acres it's likely to be. And again, battery technology may change. It's likely to only get more energy dense, but it's possible to have a less energy dense thing that's a lot cheaper that people want to start installing, and then, size might go up, but.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, frankly, I think we sort of reached a pause in the conversation, and rather than launch into a lot more stuff, I'm gonna suggest we adjourn, but we don't have to. I will be able to look then, Will, at, and Jonathan, you can look at the things you flagged, at least I can refresh myself with what, you're talking about, but you're gonna have to flesh that out. So I think, verbally, we'll go through those points one by one at the next meeting. Your substantial concerns, whatever, and other stuff that Jonathan or I think about. So does adjourning now seem like an okay idea? You guys want to slug through for another 10 minutes?
I'm happy to stop, but as you're saying, if we're at a natural stopping point.
Well, because then I was going to start scrolling down again and going into stuff, and we get launched on a whole new topic. So
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. All right, I guess I'm not hearing any objection to adjourning. So, but I want to, so it looks like it's going to take at least the next meeting to get through this, and maybe another one. So and that is totally fine. Let's see how it goes next meeting, and then depending on what the zoning commission also needs, we may have to build in an extra meeting to make sure that we get this cleared off our decks so that we can start working on some of the other things. And if you've got time to look into the CEAs and the telecommunications stuff before next meeting, that's great. And I'll contact Danby also before the next meeting.
Just a reminder that the zoning commission meeting, I mean, no pressure, of course, whatsoever to attend them, but I mean, it might be a really useful thing, if possible, for you guys to at least go to the next meeting and hear what's going on.
Yeah, I will definitely tune in occasionally. I'm sort of, allergic to meetings despite what I keep running, but yes, time is precious. But yes, I will try to make that and various zoning meetings. And I think Will's planning to go because she's going to talk. One more thing, Will, go ahead.
Just one more thing. Catherine, are you going to bring up to the town board the suggestions that Greg and Doug made about taking the issues to TCOG and the need for the advantages that having a set of standards and countywide training, all those things? Are you going to take those to the town board?
Mm-hmm. I always give a summary.
Is anyone? Sorry?
I summarize these meetings for the board, if that's what you're asking. But if there's something specific that you would like to pass on, you can send that to me in email or.
Yeah, why don't you say, and I think specifically the idea of whether this needs to be a county, for sure.
I will be addressing that for sure. I guess yes, I will be addressing that. I think my question is I don't know what that's going to do to this law.
I agree.
Right? Because if our argument is this is really something that's beyond the town of Caroline, which I mean, I'm gonna be transparent. I believe it is. So what does that mean then for all the time and effort and work that you guys have put you've been sweating it out with this thing all along, which, you know, I'm just the liaison. So I'm watching it
So-
all happen, but I will share with you that, you know, the whole time this has been happening, this has been my concern. So I hear you, Will. And also I'll share that when I do present that, then the board's response appropriately should be, and will be, well, so what does that mean?
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
are we-
I think that, right. I mean, the one thing I definitely got, and I think this is true, is that training should be countywide, because for one, that makes it more cost effective and more likely to happen. If we try to, I mean, I sort of probably would felt that we try to ask them for training for our 3 departments here, they might or might not, but if we can say, hey, Tompkins County, come in and train all our guys, that makes a lot of sense to me. Whether there needs to be a uniform set of laws in all the towns, that's really not going to happen, just because of the way towns work. So I think we should pass this law. If other towns want to use it as a model, great. You know, but Doug's right, you know, or Greg was maybe Greg that said it, that, you know, they will tend to locate in whichever community has the least restrictions.
Right. I guess what I'm suggesting, and this will come from the town board, this is not, you know, for just me, but while I'm here, you know, like, ought the law to say, I mean, until such time, like if the training is requisite for one of these things going in, then it's a little bit of like chicken egg thing, because currently we don't have that training. So in my mind, then that means I would argue that without that training, this is not an appropriate thing to happen. So
No.
like, yes, we have the law, but like we can't.
Right, but the law says they have to be trained. So I think I agree with you.
The
That's great.
company has to train them. The company has to train, and it could be a countywide training.
Right, but I guess I'm just saying the timeline of the whole thing, you know, this is all theoretical, of course, because we don't have a project. The timeline of this is that then the applicant is going to go to the review board, and then the applicant, the project is going to need to be, the application is going to need to be reviewed. And I think that I would recommend that you guys put whatever guidelines, standards, not even guidelines, whatever requirements in that you feel would be appropriate, because all the review board can do is go based on what they have on the books.
Right. But
And
yeah, agreed. And whether they say, okay, we'll review this and you have to promise to do a training,
Yes.
versus we won't review this until you do the training.
Correct.
Right.
Those are very different.
Yeah. Got it.
So, but
Okay. I think the other thing was maybe pushing the general issue of water access for the fire departments. But again, I think Bill says, you know, yeah, I know Irene was in on that. It has come up, but you know, I think the fire departments probably feel they've been ignored on that issue, and that's got to not feel good after all these years.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. And we will
Thank you.
convene about a month now on July 15th.
Enjoy your summer.
hi guys.
Yeah, you
Bye.
guys, for sure.